I meant to tell you this last week, but I started my week off with a load that was going to be one that I arrived very, very early for, and I would end up just having to sit there. And so when I went into the office, I said, why would I be sent this load? Because they know that I'm starting at midnight and I would be arriving there at 3 a.m. and this thing's not going to be ready until 8. Why would they assign this to me? And the lady in the office said, well, this is when you need to keep in mind something: effective time management. I've been in management before. That's a BS phrase. What that is it's a phrase that basically is saying that you need to do what the company wants you to on your own schedule. You need to just do what the company needs you to. Your schedule will be damned. So, like, for example, when I said, so I looked at her and I said, what exactly do you mean by that? And she says, well, if you know that you're not supposed to, that you're going to be arriving there at 3, then you should show up, but your load isn't going to be ready until 8. Then maybe instead of leaving at midnight, why don't you leave at 5? And so I was like, oh, so that's effective time management. And she said, yeah. So you just need to leave later, and that way you can use your clock better. And I said, okay, except for the fact that I just got through sleeping 7 hours. I take my sleep in very disciplined. That way I can make sure that I'm good for all 14 hours. If I go to sleep or just sit around for 5 hours and do nothing, then I work 14 hours. I will be up by that point almost 24 hours. I'll be up at least, 20 hours. And by the time I get up and shut down and stuff like that, it will be a full 24 hours because, it'll be like an hour on the front end and maybe 3 hours on the back end. And she's like, well, that's how you manage your time. And I'm like, no, I said I was going to start at midnight. I'm going to start at midnight. And so anyway, that was when I ended up getting there, and they ended up having it ready very early, which made me happy. But that was something that I was not the least bit pleased about. Effective time management is a BS phrase that basically is one that it basically means you need to do what the company needs you to do when the company needs you to do it. And you need to forget about your own schedule, which you can't exactly do, and this is a safety related thing. If you're going to be arriving someplace or you schedule yourself a certain way and then they decide to use your hours differently. I had the same thing when I was at Martin. It was like, well, you could show up later. I'm like, no, I'm going to start right now because I said I was going to. And so anyway, it ended up working out, but that's just it. I'm not going to start later just because you decided to schedule me differently. I'm going to show up there. I'm going to sit there and ride the clock and be frustrated the entire time. On that note, there's 2 other things that I was going to mention. We are paid for rail delays, we're paid after the first hour we're there, which is really annoying to me because we are paid for each stop. If we do a stop, a drop and hook, then we're paid $37, and that buys an hour of our time. If it's a live load or unload, then that is going to be $55, I believe it is, and that buys an hour and a half of your time. But rail, when you do a stop at the rail to pick up or drop off or whatever, you are not compensated at all. To me, that is, I don't want to use the word a scam, but really it's not exactly fair because this is a rail account. Intermodal is a rail account. So when you go to and from a rail, then you should be able to get compensated in some way for that. There's a lot of things that will delay us at the rail and delay us for more than an hour. And sure, you pay that we are paid by JB Hunt after an hour. But what about that hour that we're sitting there waiting on the TTR, waiting on the people to come back from lunch so they can move our container, something like that? There's always going to be delays at the rail. And quite often we can get out of there in less than an hour. So we're not compensated at all. And beginning a load at the rail, then we do a drop off, and then we pick up, and then we take that empty someplace else and drop that off, pick up a load, and go back to the rail. That means two of the 4 stops that we do, we're not compensated for. Now, I ended up mentioning this to one of the fleet managers last week. He said, "Yeah, but we pay you $37 for each stop, so it all kind of evens out." I'm like, except for the fact that we're there for an hour, that we're there, that it buys basically an hour of our time. And if I'm driving 60 miles an hour and you pay, or 65 miles an hour, and you pay me what I'm basically paid per mile, then that's going to equate to about $40 an hour. So it's about the same thing. You're basically paying me to stop. And he just kind of grinned at me and was like, "Well, company didn't pay for it." I'm like, "Yeah, I know it's not exactly fair." Another thing that I don't find to be fair at all is that you have to go, if you're daily, you have to go to 2 locations looking for an empty before they'll start paying you. But if you're on Southeast Regional, it's 3. So you can go one place, then you go to another place, then you go to a third place. And if by that third place they don't have an empty for you, then you can jump on the clock for that, in an hourly rate of $20 an hour. To me, that is extremely annoying, because it is not my fault that there are no empties available to me at the drop yard, or customers do not happen to have empties, or they refuse to release them. That's not my fault. I'm doing my job as a driver, going someplace when I'm told by the office, "You should be able to get an empty here or here or here." I show up at the first place, they say nope. I show up at the second place, they say nope. I show up at the third place, they say nope. To me, there should be compensation, even if it's mileage, that we put in for mileage from the very beginning. If you don't want to pay us hourly to find an empty, which is something that we shouldn't be responsible for as drivers, the company is not going to go bankrupt for paying us $20 an hour while we're trying to hunt down an empty for the company. But just like how we're not paid at the rail, dropping and picking up, we're not paid for finding an empty, which I find to be unacceptable. So anyway, those are the first 2 things I'm going to mention. When we last touched base, we talked, I was waiting. I was basically pulled off the road. I had picked up the morning at Kimberly Clark in Augusta, and I drove it back, dropped in Austell, and then went to the Palmetto. Went to Palmetto, was routed there. And I sat there for 6 hours before my manager was supposed to come in. Ends up that he was sick the previous day and he was sick that day, so he wasn't going to be able to meet with me. And I was pulled off the road. I had tried calling and saying, "Look, can I do anything else other than sit here? Can I do local or whatever?" I was like, "No, you need to drop what you're doing. Well, we're going to route you back to the office and sit there and wait." And I'm like, "But it's a waste of time. It's a waste of my time and the company's time. Just give me something else to do." "No, you're going to wait. This is a safety related thing." And this is when I was like, if it was that big of a safety related thing, you wouldn't allow me to drive back from Augusta. You would not allow me to drop it off at the Austell yard and then to drive back to Palmetto. You would route me straight. If anything, you would route me straight back to Palmetto, and you would repower the drop off. But no, it wasn't that urgent of a safety thing because I'm a safe driver. So I had some issues with this, and they were like, "I'm tired. I'm not going to repeat myself. You need to just come in and wait until your manager comes in." Well, when he was sick, I was like, "Okay, can someone else get to me?" And they said, "Yeah, his partner can." So he has a partner inside the office that they, I guess, team up on things. And so he looked at the safety related thing that I needed to be part of, and he looks at it and says, "Oh no, let me look at the notes because I don't see why you would need to be here." He looks over things and says, "You didn't need to be here at all. It was just not written. The report wasn't written correctly, and so it was kicked back. But no, you're not actually needed for anything." And I'm like, so I was pulled off the road, and my day, I only worked like 3.5 hours of my drive time that day. And by sitting there for, at this point, 6.5 hours, I was like, so basically my clock is completely shot because I was pulled off the road and I can't do anything about it. And he's like, well, why don't you tell me what it was? And we'll just, and so I was like, okay, he's just asking me to repeat it because it's going to justify me being there. So I told him the story, and he just nodded and said, yes, the same thing it says here that you wrote. And I'm like, okay, well, do you need me for anything? He says, no, it wasn't submitted correctly. It wasn't written correctly. So I'm writing it in the proper format. I'll submit it and it should drop out right off the thing. I'm like, okay, do you know why I was pulled off the road for this if I wasn't even needed? And he's like, no. And I was like, okay. So I said, this is the second time that I basically have had this conversation with someone, because I had this conversation before. He said, yeah, he said, if basically when I was sent the report, I was told to go over it and be aware of what was going on. As I mentioned before, it had all these things in there that says I was coached about this and that and the other. I was never coached about it. So when I was in there, I mentioned that I've been in management before, so I understand the process. I understand why things need to be the way they need to be and written certain ways and formatted certain ways and whatever. But what I did not understand is being pulled off the road and having my entire day sacrificed because I needed to be there for something that I didn't need to be there for. And he was like, yeah, he says, most of the time we do these by phone. He says, it's only like if there's something really, really bad we bring you in for. And he says, we could have done this by phone. And I'm like, yeah, well, I was pulled off the road. He's like, and so I said, I'd like compensation. He said, I can't approve that. Your manager might be able to, but he says, you see that office over there? Go talk to him. And he told me the guy's name. And so I went in there and I knocked on it. I introduced myself to him a couple of weeks ago. And I went in there and I told him the gist of it, that I was basically pulled off the road for no real reason because I wasn't even needed. And he said, wait a second. So, and I recapped. I said, yeah, he just got through telling me that it's, that I was pulled, that I was not even needed because it was just something that wasn't written up correctly. And he thought about it and says, well, how long were you waiting? I said, over 6 hours. And he said, how much time is left on your clock? I said, right now, about 2 hours. 2 hours driving. He says, yeah, they're not going to give you anything else today. I'm like, yeah, I know, my entire day was shot by coming in and waiting for someone that's not going to come in until 6 hours after I got there. He's like, all right, I tell you what, put in for 6 hours. I said, okay. He says, I'll make sure that it's approved. Apparently, my manager came in, knew nothing about any of this. I was already gone for the day. And so it was the next day, because that was the Thursday, it was my Friday. And before he left the office on Friday, since he had come in and he had done a part day, he went in and saw the 6 hours, and and I mentioned what it was for, and he straight declined it. And then his note was, need hours and what review? Because I said it was waiting for a review with a manager and the meeting with the manager. He didn't even know about the meeting. So at this point, I sent him an email and I said, here's the lowdown. Here's what happened. I was pulled off the road. I told him everything. And he didn't reply to my email. He has not, as of right now, not replied to my email, to any email I've ever sent him once. I didn't expect him to because he was gone for the weekend at this point. But I also resubmitted the hours, and I put the times and put all the information in there so that way he would have it. And of course, we went over a new weekend cycle, so who knows if it's going to be approved or not. But that's my money. I don't get loads for mileage or drop and hook or live load or something like that. I was sitting in the office twiddling my thumbs, frustrated, and my entire day was shot. So what happened the following day? Basically, when I shut down, I basically started the next day, and I was told, we received a message while I was asleep that basically said that the company was light on loads because we're actually going into a holiday. As of right now, I'm recording this the Sunday before Thanksgiving 2024. So this is 4 days before Thanksgiving. And basically, this was the Thursday before Thanksgiving. And I was told loads are very, very light. there really isn't very many loads. And there's a lot more drivers wanting loads than there are loads. So I went into the office since I was starting off my day and I had to shut down anyway at Palmetto. So I went in and I said, hey, my day was shot yesterday. He brings it up and he says, oh yeah, you got some good miles in there Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And then he says, yeah, you shut down yesterday after 3.5 hours. I'm like, yeah, I know. I was pulled into the office for a meeting that I didn't need to be there for. He's like, let me see if I can get you something. And he's like, the only thing we have is, and he says, I can give you this. You need to pick up an empty someplace and then go up to Anderson, South Carolina and pick up a First Tissue, which I was there earlier in the week. He says, pick up a load from First Tissue and take it over to Palmetto. I said, okay, I can do that. And since there really wasn't, he says, there really isn't anything else, especially if you need to be back by today. I said, yeah, this is my weekend. He's like, yeah, this is the longest thing I have. I was like, okay, where can I get it empty? So he told me that I can get it empty at a place I was at last week. The place I went on Friday last week off of exit 140 and off of 85 in the torrential downpour. And I went up there and they had apparently had no empties. So I was like, all right, well, I need another location. They said, how about, it's about, 9 miles away. It's on your way still. Cause it was given to me because it was on my way. So I went up to exit 147 and pulled off there and went to, I think it was a Kimberly Clark. I could be mistaken. But picked up, they had it empty. They had 27, which is 10 over their pool of 17. So they had, yeah, sure. Come grab one. So I grabbed one and then continued on up to Anderson. Dropped off the empty, picked up the trailer. I came back, dropped it at Palmetto, and I had called on the way and said, hey, what else do you have? And they said, let's see. I don't know that we have anything. You have how many hours? I said about 5.5. And they said, we could probably get you down to Macon. Macon is about 100 miles, and then you could drop and then pick up in about another 100 miles. I said, if it's a container that's ready to go now, I will gladly do it because I could get down there and get back before rush hour. He says, yeah, let me go ahead and put this on you. He says, I can't tell the status of the container, which means he doesn't know if it's if it's on a train or whatever. He says, I can't see the status of it, but what I can do is just assign it to you and we'll see what happens. I said, okay. So I dropped off my container. Then all of a sudden I put the information into the app and it says TTR. Go pick up a chassis and wait for the container. So I go and pick up the chassis and I go over and I am sitting there waiting. And I'm waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And by the time I have 4.5 hours left on my clock, or just a little bit over actually, I message the office and I say, I have been in TTR now for nearly an hour. This is, going to be, it's an hour and 45 minutes to the place in Macon. And if I spend 30 minutes there at the place in Macon and then an hour and 45 minutes back, I would have 45 minutes left. But when I come back now, it's going to be right in the middle of rush hour. I'm not going to be able to make this. I'm not optimistic about that. Would you at least let me pick this up and take it back to Palmetto so that way somebody could just grab it and go and not have to deal with this? He said, yeah, we'll probably do that. Let me get with the planner. Planner came back and said, no, just leave. So I put in for 30 minutes of detainment at the rail yard, which would pay a mighty $10. And then I went back to Palmetto and I shut down. So basically my Thursday and my Friday were completely shot. I was so frustrated. But you know what? That's the way things go sometimes, right? And I know I'm making it sound bitter. I mean, for the most part, when JB Hunt keeps me moving, I like it. I can make money. I can make this work. The thing is, I just don't like delays. And there's a lot of delays that happen, and those delays they don't even pay you for. So I'm probably going to request a different manager. My manager, as of right now, even when I called during his office hours, he never answers the phone. The phone system says your manager is not available right now, but would you like to hold for the next available manager? when I get somebody, I say, can you transfer me over to him? He's not available right now. Okay. He's never once been available when I've called. I write him emails, only a few so far, but he's never once replied to any of them. The only time I've ever received an email from him is when he wanted me to explain what the safety-related thing was in when I exceeded 20 miles an hour in the rail yard for a few seconds. And so I wrote up the explanation of that. But it was really interesting to me because that to me, I don't understand how he is. Just his management style is probably great for a lot of people. For me, he has never coached me on anything. He just rejects things. And normally, like, I'm a communication person. I require communication. So if you're going to reject something, at least send me a message and say why. And you can write a note as to why something was rejected. And he does do that. But I'm new. So I had no idea I was supposed to do certain things because I've not been coached on it. And I even went in person when I talked to him at one point. I said, hey, if there's something I need to do, let me know because I'm still new. And he's like, yeah, no problem. I'll let you know. Hasn't. So I'm probably going to see how things go this week because I have off Thanksgiving. I've taken that Thanksgiving I already have scheduled off. And so I'm going to be working a 4-day week. If there is a problem this week, I'm going to take steps to find out what I need to do to get another manager. I'm sure he's fine for many people, but to me, I require communication or at least someone to be there if I am going to reach out. To me, it's annoying. Anyway, let me go ahead and tell you about today. Today is Sunday, officially my Monday, so I started at midnight. And the load I was sent was, it just had a 5 a.m. time, which tells me it's an appointment time, which means it's going to be a live load, even though it was listed as a pickup. So I'm like, okay. So, and I even asked the office, I said, I'm going to get there at 3. And they said, well, if you show up there early, just lay over and wait for it. I'm like, okay, great. Anyway, I got there, I checked in. First of all, I had to get an empty, which means that luckily gave me a couple places that are close. Both of those places were full, so they didn't have any. So they gave me another place that was just down the street. So luckily, it only took me about half an hour to go to 3 different places, and the third place had it empty. From there, I went straight north and went up to, where was I? Where did I go? Oh, it was in Tennessee, Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I checked in there, and they were like, okay, why are you JB Hunt guys showing up here so early? I said, I don't know. I started at midnight, and they said, come on over. And they said, just go on over there and then, see what happens. I was like, okay. And he's like, okay, well, yeah, hop in line. Another JB Hunt guy is over there right now. We're loading him, but hop in dock 1 and then we'll get to you. I'm like, oh, this is a live load? He's like, oh yeah. I was like, okay. So I informed the office it was not a drop and hook. It was a live load, even though it was listed as a drop and hook. And I sat there and waited for an hour and a half for that to be done. Once it was done, I picked up, dropped at Palmetto. I called and updated them on my ETA because I was having an issue with every time I reset an ETA, it sometimes changes within the first 5 minutes, which is the time it takes sometimes the load or unload call, or you leaving the rail. It will change your time. So you normally would want to wait like 5 minutes and then resubmit it. But I was already on the road. I'm not going to sit there and pull over to the side of the road and do that. So I just called them. And I said, hey, can you update my ETA? And they said, sure, what time? And I told them, and they said, okay, no problem. Got to Palmetto. I dropped off that load, looked at my load. It was straight pick up and go to Dublin, the place I've been before, the Walmart DC. So I headed straight out. Got there. Dropped off, picked up an empty, had a little bit over 2 hours left on my clock, and I was really hoping they'd give me something so that way I could start heading that direction. But no, they're not going to do that. They said, go ahead and find a safe haven. And I'm like, great. So I pulled over here, which is a Jet here, a Jet Express, Jet, something like that, where they have like 20 parking spots here for trucks. It's officially a paid lot if you're here after 7 p.m., but I went in and said, I'm going to be leaving here by like 10 p.m. So is there a charge for that? And she just kind of said, most of the time people will come here later and they'll be the ones that will end up charging. So they said, if you're going to be here and be out by 10, somebody will come in and need a space to go, need a space. And so they'll end up buying it. So don't worry about it. I said, do I need to mention your name or something like that? And she says, no, they're not going to look at the cameras. So I was like, okay, I guess it's on the honor system, but I at least did ask. And I'm not going to say the girl's name, but I was like, okay, well, thank you so much. So I am shut down here. I had 2 hours left on my clock and was unable to drive. Luckily, though, I made about, let me see. Here's the latest in my Rand McNally shortchanging. On my Friday, I was paid for 295 miles. I drove 312.6. And then today, I was paid for 465 miles, and I drove 509.5. So again, Rand McNally today shortchanged me by 45 miles, which is like $30. And on my Friday of last week, I was shortchanged by about 17. So it's about just over $10. This is the reality that I live with, unfortunately. And I know I sound bitter. I'm kind of using this as a bit of a vent because when I do my next update, it will be at the end of my week, and it will be only 3 more days. So I figured I'd split this week up since I was talking about my management, my being pulled in, and compensation stuff for last week. Anyway, that is that. I will say this, though. There is more money to be made at JB Hunt. So the opportunities are definitely there, better so than the other companies I've worked. I just don't like the fact that we work and we do not get compensated for some of the work that we do. I was told when I was talking to the initial people, and they said, "Oh yeah, document everything because you will get paid for everything you do." I'm like, okay, cool. Except the first hour of a rail delay. Oh, and you don't get paid for stops at the rail. Oh, and you don't get paid for picking up an empty. So basically, aside from the driving, the mileage, and the drop and hook at the customer locations, the main things that we find ourselves doing on a weekly basis, I'm not paid for. I really wish that would change. I'm powerless to do anything about it by myself, but hey, that would be nice. Who knows? Maybe in time they will. Anyway, that's it. I'm going to get ready to go to sleep because I'm leaving tonight at 10 something. It's whatever time I get out of here after doing my pre-trip, and I'll be hitting the road. So there you go. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thanks for watching.